Welcome, everyone, to the Deep Dive. Today, we're embarking on a truly monumental journey, a deep dive into one of the most profound and, frankly, really daring philosophical works ever penned. Baruch Spinoza's Ethics, proved in geometrical order.
Yeah, it's quite something.
It really is. This isn't just a book you read. It's more like an entire universe of thought, designed to reshape your understanding of God, human nature, and, what it truly means to be free.
Absolutely. It challenges pretty much everything.
Now, before we even crack open the first definition, let's just set the stage a bit. It's important context. Imagine living in 17th century Amsterdam.
A place known for tolerance, relatively speaking.
Exactly. A beacon of intellectual freedom, you might think. Yet even there, Spinoza's ideas were just so radical, so utterly groundbreaking, that they put him on a direct collision course with, well, both religious and intellectual authorities.
Oh, definitely.
This wasn't some cozy academic debate for him. This was serious stuff. Excommunication, social ostracization, a life lived on the intellectual fringes, really.
What's truly fascinating here is the sheer personal cost of Spinoza's conviction. His whole approach, this naturalistic way of looking at everything.
Everything meaning?
Well, the very nature of existence, physics, the human mind, psychology, our emotions, the whole lot. It echoed figures who were already seen as controversial, even dangerous.
Like Hobbes.
Like Thomas Hobbes, yeah, whose materialist views were widely condemned. Or even closer, Adrian Koerbagh, an intellectual friend of Spinoza's, who actually died in prison for beliefs not totally dissimilar to some of Spinoza's own.
Wow, died in prison.
Yeah. So the establishment definitely viewed this kind of thinking as dangerous. And for Spinoza himself, the consequences were, well, swift and severe. He was excommunicated from the Jewish community in Amsterdam, July 27, 1656.
And it wasn't just a slap on the wrist, right?
Not at all. It was a herem, a writ of excommunication that was particularly punitive. The language used was chilling. We're talking curses, blotting out his name, forbidding anyone in the community from even approaching him, reading his work, anything.
Complete isolation.
Total intellectual isolation was the goal, a definitive rejection.
So he knew the risks. He absolutely understood the potential for condemnation, yet he just systematically, relentlessly laid out this vision of reality that challenged everything people thought they knew about God, about free will, the very fabric of existence.
It really did, with this incredible logical rigor.
So our mission today is to guide you through this complex, beautiful, and remarkably consistent philosophical system. It's a journey designed, hopefully, to make you not just well-informed, but maybe genuinely transformed in how you view the world and your place within it. Let's really unpack this. Tag the geometrical method. Definitions, axioms, propositions, proofs, corollaries.
Yeah.
So first things first. Spinoza didn't present his ethics like, a typical philosophical treatise, no flowing arguments or rhetorical flourishes.
Oh, no.
He wrote it like a geometry textbook.
Yeah.
Like Euclid, right?
Oh, yeah.
Definitions, axioms, propositions, proofs, corollaries, the whole mathematical 9 yards.
Yeah.
So what's the significance of this geometrical method? Why this seemingly rigid mathematical approach for philosophy, for these deep questions about existence?
Well, that raises a really fundamental question about how Spinoza wanted us to get at truth. He wasn't just like copying geometry for style points.
Right.
He was making a huge assertion that reality itself has this inherent rational geometrical order. He believed that if we can just analyze the logical relations between our concepts clearly enough.
We can unlock reality itself.
Basically, yes.
Wow.
We can grasp the very fabric of existence. So the method mirrors that conviction perfectly. It tries to give philosophy the same kind of logical rigor, the same certainty as mathematics.
Wow.
The insight is profound, really. If you truly understand an idea clearly and distinctly, you're not just thinking about reality, you're actually grasping its intrinsic necessary structure.
Okay, so let's break down the components then, this unique method.
Right. So first you have the definitions. These are the super clear, precise starting points for all the key terms. Think of them as the bedrock.
Like defining God or substance right at the start.
Exactly. He begins each part of the ethics by defining concepts like substance, attribute, mode, trying to leave absolutely no room for ambiguity. He basically says, look, the success of my proofs and your understanding hinges on using these terms consistently. They're the fixed points.
Okay, definitions first, then.
Then come the axioms. These are supposed to be self-evident truths, statements so fundamental they don't need proof themselves, universal principles.
Got an example.
A really crucial one he uses is the idea that cognition of an effect depends upon the cognition of its cause and involves it.
Okay, to know the effect, you need to know the cause. Seems reasonable.
It does, but think about the implication. If that's true, then to properly conceive of any single thing in the universe, you ultimately have to conceive of its cause and its cause's cause all the way back.
To God, since God is the ultimate cause of everything.
Precisely. It's an immediate logical leap right from that axiom towards his whole monistic view of reality. Very clever.
Okay, definitions, axioms, what's next?
Propositions. These are the core claims, the statements Spinoza sets out to prove. They're the building blocks of his system, and each one is supposed to follow logically from what came before the definitions, axioms, or earlier propositions.
So each proposition makes a specific claim about reality, or us, or emotions.
Exactly. Waiting to be demonstrated. Then come the proofs. These are the logical deductions, just like in Euclidean geometry. Spinoza meticulously shows how each proposition necessarily, inescapably follows. The whole thing is meant to be this unbroken chain of unassailable logic.
One truth leading to the next, building the whole picture.
That's the aim. And finally, you have corollaries. These are like little bonus truths. Immediate consequences or straightforward deductions that follow directly from a proposition or its proof without needing a whole new argument.
Okay, that makes sense. The structure is clear. But here's the part that always blows my mind a little.
Go on.
He makes this incredibly bold claim that the conceptual dependence of our ideas, how one idea logically leads to another, actually mirrors the causal dependence in nature itself.
Yes, that's the big leap.
So, if concept X logically requires concept Y, then in reality, Y must somehow cause X. Is that right?
That's essentially it. Think about a triangle. Its properties, like having angles that sum to 180 degrees, logically follow from its definition. Spinoza says that kind of logical relationship reflects a real causal relationship in the world.
So our clear rational thought isn't just describing reality.
It's grasping its innermost necessary structure. It's an incredibly ambitious claim about what reason can do. He thinks the order of ideas and the order of things are ultimately the same. Hashtag core doctrines.
Okay, so that geometrical method is the vehicle, the structure. But what's it delivering? What are the core ideas? Because at the heart of the ethics are these doctrines that were, and honestly still are, pretty revolutionary. They fundamentally redefine traditional philosophy, traditional religion.
Absolutely. They challenge centuries of thinking, deeply controversial stuff.
So let's dive into these foundational ideas, the ones that really underpin his whole system. Where do we start? Hashtag substance monism, God nature.
Well, the absolute starting point, arguably the most radical claim, is substance monism. The idea that there is only one substance in the entire universe.
Just one thing.
Just one. He states it with breathtaking directness. No substance can be or be conceived besides God.
Whoa. Okay, so everything is God, or part of God.
In a way, yes. It means God is unique and absolutely infinite. There isn't a separate physical world over here and a separate spiritual world over there. No multiple independent substances floating around.
Unlike Descartes, with his mind and body as distinct substances.
Exactly. Spinoza throws that out. For him, everything that exists, every thought you have, every object, every process in the cosmos, all of it belongs to this single, infinite, overarching substance. It's an absolute, indivisible unity.
So my mind and my body aren't separate things.
Not separate substances. There are different ways of experiencing or conceiving the one underlying substance, different expressions of it. It's an entire universe contained within one singular, infinite being. That's substance monism. Hashtag pantheism naturalism. God is nature, not a personal being.
Okay, so if God is the only substance and everything's literally in God, then what kind of God are we talking about here? Because it sounds, well, it doesn't sound like the personal God of traditional religions. You know, the one who acts with intentions, has purposes, feels emotions.
Exactly. It's fundamentally different. For Spinoza, God or nature acts by the same necessity by which he exists. That phrase, God or nature, delis if natura, is key.
So God is nature.
Essentially, yes. They are one and the same reality. And this God nature acts out of necessity, not choice or purpose. God does not possess freedom of will or absolute pleasure.
Why not? Why can't God have a will or a plan?
Because, think about it, the very idea of having a purpose implies a lack. It implies wanting something you don't have yet, aiming for a goal.
Right, you act in order to achieve something.
Precisely. But God, being absolutely infinite and perfect, lacks nothing. God is complete. So to attribute purposes or intentions to God, Spinoza argues, is actually to make God imperfect, to diminish God's absolute nature by projecting human limitations onto him.
So all those ideas about divine plans, God's purpose for us.
Spinoza calls them human fancies. He says all final causes are nothing but human fancies. We as humans are conscious of our desires, but often ignorant of their real causes, so we tend to project our own goal-oriented thinking onto everything, including nature and God. We think things happen for a reason, usually one that benefits us.
But for Spinoza,
That's just our limited imagination at work. God, in his view, is simply the eternally existing, eternally active totality of nature itself, operating through inherent, immutable necessity, like the laws of physics operating. There's no divine consciousness planning things out, just the infinite necessary unfolding of reality according to its own laws. Hashtag determinism, all is necessary, no free will.
okay, this is leading somewhere pretty challenging. If God is this infinite necessary nature acting without purpose, just unfolding according to its own laws, then what about us? What about human free will?
Ah, yes, the big one.
It feels like if everything is just necessary unfolding, there's no room for choice as we normally think of it. It kind of makes our efforts, our moral struggles, seem pointless.
That's definitely the immediate reaction many people have. And Spinoza forces us to confront it head on. His answer is radical, but maybe surprisingly, he sees it as empowering in the end. But yes, he is absolutely unflinching on this point. Nothing in nature is contingent.
Meaning nothing happens by chance.
Right. But everything is determined to exist and to operate in a specific way by the necessity of the divine nature. And this applies to everything. Physical events, like a stone falling.
And mental events too, like our thoughts, our desires.
Yes, including our thoughts and desires. He argues that the will cannot be called a free cause, but only a necessary one.
So the will isn't this independent thing making choices.
No. For Spinoza, the will isn't some separate faculty hovering above our thoughts. It's just a particular mode of thinking, like the intellect. It's an idea. And therefore, no volition whatsoever can exist or be determined to operate unless it is determined by another cause, and this in turn by another, and so on ad infinitum.
An infinite chain of causes determining even our desires.
Exactly. So what people commonly perceive as free will, Spinoza says that's merely our consciousness of our own actions and desires, combined with our ignorance of the true underlying causes that are determining those actions and desires.
So we feel free because we know what we want, but we don't know why we want it.
Precisely. He compares it to a thinking stone rolling down a hill. If it were conscious, it might think it was choosing to roll, simply because it was aware of its motion and desired to continue, but it would be ignorant of the gravity and the push that actually set it in motion.
He even calls the idea that actions depend on some mysterious will.
He calls it words with no idea attached, because people can't actually explain what this will is or how it supposedly makes decisions or moves the body. Our so-called free decisions, he suggests, are like decisions in dreams. They feel real and voluntary at the time, but they aren't ultimately free from the chain of causes.
Okay, let's really try to get our heads around this because it fundamentally challenges our sense of self. So even our decisions, our choices, they aren't uncaused beginnings.
Not in Spinoza's view. They are, rather, affirmations that our ideas necessarily involve. When you have an idea, the affirmation of that idea is the volition.
So willing isn't separate from thinking.
He takes it even further. The will and the intellect are one and the same thing.
Whoa. Okay, explain that.
It means willing isn't a separate faculty that comes after understanding and then decides. It's intrinsic to the idea itself. When you grasp an idea clearly and adequately, you are, in that very act, affirming its content. That affirmation is what we call will.
So understanding is a form of willing.
And vice versa. It's a unified process, not step one, think, step two, decide. It's all one mental event, determined by prior causes. Hashtag mind-body parallelism, thought and extension as parallel attributes.
All right, so we have one substance, God nature, and strict determinism. But if there's only one substance, how do we explain the obvious difference between mind and body? They feel so different. Thoughts aren't physical. Bodies aren't thoughts. How can they interact if they're different? Or how can they be distinct if there's only one reality? Descartes really struggled with this.
He did, with his infamous pineal gland interaction point. Spinoza offers a completely different solution, one that avoids that interaction problem altogether. It's his theory of parallelism.
Okay.
Remember, God, the one substance, has infinite attributes, infinite ways its essence can be perceived. But we humans, with our limited minds, only know two of these attributes, thought and extension.
Extension meaning physical stuff, taking up space.
Exactly, the physical world. And thought meaning, well, the realm of ideas, consciousness, mind. But crucially, these are not separate substances. They are different, non-reducible ways of experiencing and conceiving the one underlying substance, God nature.
Different perspectives on the same thing.
That's a good way to put it. And the key insight is articulated in a famous proposition. The order and connection of ideas is the same as the order and connection of things.
The order of ideas matches the order of physical things.
Perfectly. Imagine you decide to raise your arm. In the attribute of thought, there's the idea, the volition. In the attribute of extension, there's the physical event, nerves firing, muscles contracting, the arm moving. Spinoza says these two series of events happen in perfect correspondence, in parallel.
But one doesn't cause the other. The thought doesn't cause the movement.
Nope. And the physical state doesn't cause the thought. They are two parallel expressions of the same underlying reality unfolding. One single event in the substance viewed through two different attributes.
That's two sides of the same coin.
Exactly. Or like watching a movie with both picture and sound perfectly synchronized. The picture doesn't cause the sound doesn't cause the picture, but they are perfectly coordinated aspects of the single underlying film. So for every mental event, there's a corresponding physical event and vice versa, but no causal interaction between the attributes. ### substance attribute mode.
Okay, to really cement this understanding of Spinoza's universe, we need to be super clear on his fundamental categories: substance, attribute, and mode. You've mentioned them, but let's define them precisely. These seem like the absolute building blocks of his whole system.
They absolutely are. The ABCs of his metaphysics. And he defines them with that geometric precision right at the start. Think of it like a nested hierarchy, maybe. Host speaker. Okay, so top level, substance. Expert speaker. Right. Defined as what is in itself and is conceived through itself. That is, that whose concept does not require the concept of another thing from which it must be formed. Host speaker. Self-sufficient. Doesn't depend on anything else. Expert speaker. Yeah. Exactly. And as we've established, for Spinoza, there's only one such thing. God or nature. It's the ultimate self-causing reality. Infinite, eternal. Everything else depends utterly on it. It's the whole shebang. Host speaker. Okay, beneath substance we have attribute. Expert speaker, yes. An attribute is defined as what the intellect perceives of substance as constituting its essence. It's a fundamental way the substance is or how it's understood. Host speaker, like the essential properties.
Expert speaker.
Exactly. The essential ways the substance expresses itself. Remember, substance itself has infinite attributes, but we only perceive two, thought and extension. They aren't separate from substance. They are the substance as perceived in a certain essential way. Host speaker. And the third category, mode. Expert speaker. Modes are defined as the affections of substance or that which is in another and is conceived through another. Host speaker. Affections. Like modifications. Expert speaker. Modifications, yes. Particular, finite individual things that exist and operate within the substance through its attributes. So my body is a mode of extension. My mind, or a specific thought I'm having right now, is a mode of thought. Host speaker. So individual people, trees, emotions, ideas, these are all modes. Expert speaker, right. They are simply affections of God's attributes or modes by which God's attributes are expressed in a specific and determinate way. They can't exist or even be conceived without the substance and its attributes. They are dependent, temporary expressions of the eternal substance, like waves on the ocean. Host speaker. The ocean is the substance, the wateriness is an attribute like extension, and the individual waves are the modes. Expert speaker.
That's a pretty good analogy, yeah.
So, to bring it back to us, my body is a finite mode of extension. My mind is a finite mode of thought, both ultimately just expressions of the one infinite substance, God nature.
That's the picture. Everything interconnected, everything an expression of divine power. ## God revisited.
Right. Let's circle back to God then, with these categories clearer in mind, because it's such a central concept, but so different from the usual picture. We've said God is substance, God is nature, impersonal, acting by necessity. Can we refine that picture a bit more now?
Definitely. So God isn't just the cause of things existing.
Like starting the engine.
Right, not just that. God is also the cause of their essence. Their very nature, what they are, flows necessarily and eternally from God's being. That infinite power we talked about, it expresses itself. From the sheer necessity of the divine nature, infinite things must follow in infinite ways.
Infinite things in infinite ways. So everything that can possibly exist does exist necessarily as part of God's nature.
That's the idea. Everything that can be conceived by an infinite intellect follows necessarily from God's infinite power. And importantly, let's reiterate, Spinoza argues God is fundamentally without passions and is not affected by any emotion of joy or sadness.
Because passions imply change, right? Passing to greater or lesser perfection.
Exactly. God does not pass to a greater or to a lesser perfection.
Yeah.
Because God is absolute, unchanging perfection. There's nothing external that could possibly affect God, since God is everything.
So attributing emotions or even will to God is just.
It's anthropomorphism, projecting human limitations onto the infinite. Spinoza's God is pure, infinite, unchanging, eternally active being, identical with nature and its immutable laws. Not an agent making choices, but the necessary ground from which all reality flows. Hashtag the nature and origin of the mind.
Okay, so given this vast, deterministic, impersonal God nature, how does the human mind fit in? This thing we experience as us, our consciousness, our thoughts, our sense of self. Where do we come from in this system?
Right. So the human mind, for Spinoza, isn't some separate spiritual entity. It's a specific and determinate mode of thinking. It's a particular expression of God's attribute of thought.
Just like the body is a mode of extension.
Exactly. And here's where he makes a really striking claim about what the mind is. He says, the idea of an actually existing body is the first thing that constitutes the actual being of a human mind.
Wait, the mind is the idea of the body.
In essence, yes. The mind is the mental correlate, the thinking expression of a particular actually existing physical body. Its primary object is that body.
So my mind exists because my body exists, and it's fundamentally the idea of this body.
That's the core idea. For every physical event or state in your body, there's a corresponding idea or mental event in your mind. Remember the parallelism? And the mind's capacity, its richness, directly correlates with the body's complexity and capacity. Meaning, the more capable and complex a body is, the more ways it can interact with and be affected by the world, the more capable its corresponding mind is of perceiving and understanding many things. A more complex body allows for a more complex mind.
That makes intuitive sense. A healthy, active body often feels like it supports a clearer mind.
Spinoza would agree. And this connection leads to a really interesting, almost humbling point about self-knowledge.
How so?
He argues the mind does not know itself, except insofar as it perceives ideas of affections of the body.
So we don't have direct introspection. We know ourselves only through how our body interacts with the world.
Pretty much. It's not a direct gaze inward, but more like understanding ourselves based on how we are affected. So the mind doesn't have adequate cognition, clear and distinct understanding of the parts composing the human body just by itself.
So our everyday understanding of ourselves and the world,
in the common order of nature, as he puts it, is often confused and mutilated, fragmented, partial, unclear. We perceive things primarily through how our body is affected by them, rather than grasping their true causes and essences adequately.
and this sets the stage for why we need different kinds of knowledge, to move beyond this confusion.
Exactly. It shows the baseline state dominated by confused ideas arising from sensory experience, and why moving towards clearer, more adequate ideas is the path to understanding and freedom. Hashtag mind and knowledge.
Okay, so that distinction between confused ideas and clear, adequate ideas is absolutely crucial then. If our ordinary starting point is often mutilated and confused, Spinoza needs to give us a way out, a path towards better understanding.
And he does. He maps it out by categorizing human cognition into 3 distinct kinds. These aren't just academic labels. They represent a hierarchy of understanding, moving from inadequacy towards clarity, and this progression is vital for achieving freedom.
All right, let's hear them. What's the first kind?
1. Imagination, or cognition from random experience. This is the lowest, most common level. It's where most of our everyday thinking happens, unfortunately.
Okay. What does it involve?
It consists of ideas that are derived from the senses or that resemble ideas from the senses. It's based on fragmented, partial, often arbitrary experiences and associations. Think of it as just receiving impressions from the world or recalling them through memory without fully grasping their underlying causes or necessary connections.
So it's inherently unreliable.
It's mutilated and confused, as he says, because these ideas are always at least partly caused by external things affecting our body, and we don't grasp the whole causal picture. He used the example of seeing the sun.
Oh, yes, the sun looking small and close.
Exactly. You imagine it as maybe 200 feet away based on sensory appearance, even though you know intellectually it's vastly distant. Imagination gives us ideas like consequences without premises. We see effects, but we don't understand the full chain of causes. He calls it the only source of falsity and confusion.
So pretty much our default state of mind, easily misled.
Often, yes. Which is why we need to move beyond it.
So what's the second kind of knowledge?
2. Reason. This is a significant step up towards clarity and adequacy.
How does reason work?
It consists of adequate ideas arising from what Spinoza calls common notions. These are ideas about properties that are common to all things, or at least to our body and the external bodies affecting it. Think of fundamental principles like the laws of physics, motion, extension itself, or mathematical truths. Concepts that apply universally and are understood adequately by all rational minds.
So it's about grasping universal principles, not just individual sense impressions.
Exactly. Reason perceives things truly because it grasps these shared necessary properties. It moves beyond the specific, fleeting experiences of imagination. Crucially, reason regards things not as contingent, but as necessary. It understands the underlying immutable connections.
Seeing the why behind things, the necessary structure.
Yes. And it perceives things from a certain vantage of eternity, meaning it grasps the eternal and necessary aspects, not just their temporary appearances. Ideas of reason are necessarily true and certain because they reflect these universal structures. It helps us see beyond personal bias and immediate sensation.
Okay, that's a big improvement over imagination. But there's a third kind, the highest.
3. Intuition, or scientia intuitiva. This is the highest, most powerful, and most transformative form of knowledge.
What does intuition grasp?
It consists of adequate ideas that conceive the essences of particular things as following from God's essence.
Whoa! Okay, unpack that. It's not just general laws like reason.
No. Reason grasps common properties. Intuition grasps the specific individual essence of a particular thing directly as it flows necessarily from the nature of God, or God's attributes. It's seeing how this specific thing fits into the whole divine order.
A direct insight into the thing's place in the universe.
Exactly. It provides the highest degree of certainty because it's an immediate holistic apprehension of reality. It's understanding the interconnectedness of this particular thing with God's infinite nature. Think of it like that aha moment of deep insight, where you suddenly see how everything connects, how this specific case perfectly illustrates a universal principle, flowing necessarily from the ground of being. It's grasping the particular through the universal in one indivisible act of understanding. Hashtag the origin and nature of the emotions theory of the emotions.
So Spinoza applies this rigorous naturalistic approach not just to reality and knowledge, but also to our inner lives, specifically our emotions, or as he calls them, effects.
Yes, absolutely. He treats emotions not as, moral failings or mysterious intrusions, but as natural phenomena, things to be understood scientifically, just like gravity or geometry, part of nature.
How does he define an emotion or an affect?
His definition is really precise and crucial. Emotion, affectus, refers to affections of the body by which the body's power of action is augmented or diminished, assisted or restrained, and at the same time the ideas of these affections.
Okay, so it's tied directly to the body's power and the mind's idea of that change.
Exactly. Emotions are changes in our power to act, our vitality, and our awareness of those changes. And he makes a key distinction here between two types of emotions. They can be active emotions. These arise when we are their adequate cause, meaning they spring from our adequate ideas, from our own rational nature and understanding. These are emotions where we genuinely act, expressing our own power.
Okay, and the other type?
Or they can be passive emotions, which he usually calls passions. These occur when we are only a partial cause, meaning they arise from inadequate or confused ideas and are at least partly caused by something external to us.
So with passions, we're being acted upon.
Precisely. We're reacting to external stimuli or internal confusions rather than acting from clear understanding. And this distinction, active versus passive, is absolutely fundamental to his whole ethical project of moving from bondage to freedom. Hashtag canadas, the striving to persevere in being.
Now, underpinning this theory of emotions, and really his whole understanding of life, is this fundamental driving force he calls the conatus. What exactly is that?
The conatus is absolutely central. Spinoza states it as a fundamental principle. Every single thing endeavors as far as it lies in itself to persevere in its own being.
Everything tries to keep going, basically, to stay in existence.
Yes, but it's more than just survival. This endeavor is simply the actual essence of the thing itself. It is the thing's power. It's the intrinsic force by which anything exists, acts, and resists forces that would destroy or diminish it.
So it's not just biological life. A rock has conatus.
In a sense, yes. A rock resists being broken. It maintains its structure. Obviously, it's much more complex than living beings. Think of a plant turning to the sun, that's its conatus expressing itself. For humans, it manifests as our fundamental will to live, our drive to maintain and enhance our being, our power, our well-being.
It's the engine driving everything.
It's the definition of a thing's actual essence, its power in action. And the mind, being the idea of the body, also has this striving. The mind endeavors to persevere in its own being for an indefinite duration, and is conscious of this endeavor it possesses.
So we're aware of this striving.
Yes, that consciousness is key to our human experience of it. And this endeavor is always, by definition, aimed at what maintains or increases the thing's power. It's inherently self-beneficial. Anything harmful must come from external forces conflicting with this internal drive.
Okay, so from this universal striving, Spinoza derives his basic emotions. You mentioned active versus passive, but are there fundamental types of affect?
Yes, he identifies three primary effects, which are the building blocks for all the complex emotions we experience. They are the elementary components:
And they are.
desire, joy, and sadness.
Let's take them one by one. Desire.
Desire is the most fundamental. Remember the conatus, the striving. When that striving is related to the mind alone, it is called will. But when it is related to mind and body simultaneously, it is called appetite. Desire, then, is simply appetite together with consciousness of it. It's our conscious awareness of that fundamental striving, that urge towards things we perceive will enhance our power.
Okay, and this leads to that famous reversal about good and bad.
Exactly. This is where he flips conventional thinking. He says, we do not endeavor anything, we do not will anything, we do not seek or desire anything because we judge it to be good. On the contrary, we judge a thing to be good because we endeavor it, will it, seek it, and desire it.
So things aren't inherently good, we just call them good because we happen to desire them, because they align with our conatus.
Precisely. Good is what increases our power of acting. Bad is what decreases it. Our desires define our values, not the other way around. It's a radical, naturalistic basis for ethics.
Wow. Okay, so desire is primary. What about joy and sadness?
They're transitions. Joy is defined as the passion by which the mind passes to greater perfection. It's an emotion that signifies an increase in our power of action, our vitality. It assists our conatus.
So joy isn't just feeling happy, it's actually becoming more powerful, more capable.
In Spinoza's terms, yes, it's a transition upward. And sadness is the opposite, the passion by which it passes to lesser perfection. It's an emotion signifying a decrease in our power of action, a diminishment of our vitality. It hinders our conatus.
So these aren't just subjective feelings, they're objective indicators of changes in our actual power, our state of being relative to that fundamental striving.
Exactly. Deeply tied to our physical and mental states. It's a very naturalistic, almost physiological view of our emotional life. Hashtag the state of bondage to passions.
Now, you mentioned the difference between active emotions and passive ones, the passions. What happens when our emotions are mainly passions?
When our emotions are passions, they are rooted in those confused ideas we talked about, the first kind of knowledge, imagination.
So they're not based on clear understanding.
Right. And critically, this means they are at least partly caused by something external. Think about a sudden surge of anger from an insult or intense fear in a strange place. These are reactions often automatic to external triggers that we don't fully grasp the necessity of.
Or even wanting something strongly because of advertising or peer pressure.
Exactly. That desire might feel internal, but it could be heavily influenced by external factors and confused ideas about what will actually bring lasting satisfaction or increase our power.
And the problem with being ruled by passions is
The problem is that as long as we're primarily governed by these inadequate ideas and passions, we are fundamentally passive. We are being acted on rather than truly acting from our own nature. Our own power, our conatus, is limited. And crucially, Spinoza says it is infinitely surpassed by the power of external causes.
infinitely surpassed. That sounds pretty helpless.
It highlights our vulnerability. If our emotions are driven by confused ideas and external influences we don't understand, we're essentially at the mercy of forces beyond our control, like a boat tossed on the waves, reacting rather than steering. We feel like we're making choices, but we're often just following the strongest passion of the moment, driven by things we don't fully comprehend. Hashtag human bondage, being subject to the passions.
Okay, so this state of being acted on, tossed about by external causes and confused ideas, this is what Spinoza calls human bondage. Let's dig into that. It sounds pretty dire. It's basically being enslaved by our own passions.
That's exactly it. Human bondage, or servitus humana, is the state of being subject to the passions. Because these passions arise from inadequate ideas, they are at least partly caused by something external. And because our own power is limited and is infinitely surpassed by the power of external causes, we simply cannot control everything that makes us.
Ooh, we're constantly reacting.
We're largely passive in the face of our own emotions and the events around us. We get buffeted by fortune, swayed by hope and fear, anger and pity, without truly understanding the necessary causes behind these feelings or events. We might think we're in control, making free choices, but often we're just affirming whatever confused idea or strong emotion presents itself most forcefully.
Can you give an example of how a passion keeps us in bondage?
Sure, think about repentance. Spinoza defines it as sadness accompanied by the idea of some deed which we believe we did by a free decision of the mind.
So feeling bad about something you think you chose to do.
Right. But since Spinoza argues traditional free will is fictitious, this sadness stems from a confused idea, the false belief that you could have acted otherwise. The regret itself is based on ignorance of the necessary causes of your action. It's a useless sadness based on a fiction.
What about something like pride?
Similarly, pride is joy arising from a person's thinking too well of himself. Again, it's rooted in inadequate self-knowledge, not understanding the true causes, internal and external, of one's abilities or successes. Both repentance and pride, while common, are passions rooted in confusion and keep us from seeing reality clearly. They are symptoms of our ignorance.
This really brings it home. These passions, fear, false hope, pride, regret, they trap us. We act, as he says, willingly or unwillingly, of which he is supremely ignorant. We don't even realize the extent to which we're being pushed around by these forces.
Exactly. And Spinoza even hints at the social implications. He notes, for instance, that the crowd is terrifying if it is not afraid.
Suggesting that fear can be used to control people.
Yes, suggesting that passions like fear or humility can be manipulated for social control, making people more compliant precisely because they are less rational when governed by these effects. Prophets and rulers might use these, even with good intentions perhaps, to manage society. But the result is still bondage, being led by opinion and imagination rather than reason. It's what he calls human powerlessness.
It really makes you question how much of our daily life is truly self-directed versus just reacting based on these confused, passionate states. Hashtag virtue and reason. Okay, so if we're often trapped in this human bondage, reacting passively to passions and confused ideas, how do we get out? What's the escape route in Spinoza's system? Is there a path to freedom?
Yes, absolutely. And the path is through virtue and reason, but he redefines virtue in a very specific way.
How so? It's not about following commandments?
No, he states very clearly, by virtue and power, I mean the same thing. So virtue is human power itself, or acting by the laws of one's own nature.
So being virtuous is just being powerful, acting according to your own nature.
Essentially, yes. The foundation of virtue is the very endeavor to preserve his own being, the conatus. To be virtuous is to successfully act from your own essential power, to maximize your conatus in a way that's guided by clear understanding. It's about becoming more fully and powerfully yourself.
And how does reason fit in?
Reason is the guide. To act from virtue is nothing else in us than to act, to live, to preserve one's being by the command of reason. When we act from reason, that second kind of knowledge, based on adequate ideas and common notions, we are acting solely from our own essence. We are the adequate cause of our actions.
So we're not being swayed by external causes or confused passions.
Exactly. We understand what we're doing and why based on clear and distinct ideas. This is the direct opposite of being passive. It's taking active command of our internal world through understanding.
What's fascinating, though, is that this reason-guided virtue isn't about self-sacrifice in the traditional sense.
Not at all. Spinoza argues that reason requires that everyone love himself, pursue what is useful for himself, what is useful for him in truth, and seek all that in truth leads a human being to greater perfection.
Rational self-interest.
You could call it that, a profound rational egoism. And this is key, it's about pursuing what is truly useful, understood through adequate ideas, which leads to genuine perfection, not just fleeting pleasures or external validation. It's intelligent self-maximization.
Doesn't that lead to conflict? Everyone just looking out for number one.
Paradoxically, no. Spinoza argues that this true rational self-interest necessarily leads to the good of others. Why? Because human beings who are governed by reason want nothing for themselves that they do not desire for all other human beings.
Why would they want that?
Because reason understands universal principles. A rational person recognizes that nothing is more useful to a human being than another human being. When people operate from reason, their natures agree, they understand the benefits of cooperation and concord. So they naturally seek to form a society where everyone can flourish, because that is actually the most advantageous state for each individual rational being.
So rational self-interest, properly understood, leads to justice, faithfulness, honor, and cooperation.
Exactly. He reconciles self-interest and the common good not through external rules, but through the inherent logic of reason itself. It's a deeply optimistic view, actually. #, power of the intellect and human freedom.
Okay, so virtue is acting powerfully from our own nature, guided by reason. Then true freedom must be really tied up with the power of our intellect, our ability to understand clearly. This seems like the core mechanism for escaping bondage.
Precisely. The power of the intellect is the path to freedom. Spinoza offers direct remedies for the passions, and the primary remedy is knowledge, understanding.
How does knowledge help with overwhelming emotions?
He puts forward this incredibly powerful, almost therapeutic principle. An emotion which is a passion ceases to be a passion as soon as we form a clear and distinct idea of it.
Just understanding it changes it. How?
When you truly understand the causes and nature of a passion, say, why you feel intense anger in a certain situation, tracing its causes back, it transforms, it stops being this alien force acting on you, and becomes something you grasp intellectually.
Yeah.
You integrate it into your rational understanding. It's no longer a blind compulsion, it's an understood phenomenon.
So the more you know an emotion,
The more it is placed within our abilities and the less passive the mind is in relation to it. Because we can, he argues, form some clear and distinct concept of any bodily affection and therefore of any emotion linked to it.
so this isn't about suppressing emotions, becoming some kind of robot.
Yeah. No, not suppression in the sense of just burying them. It's about transformation through understanding, turning passive, confusing emotions, passions, into active emotions that arise from our own understanding, or at least managing them effectively through reason. Remember, the mind is most acted on when inadequate ideas constitute its greatest part, and acts the most when adequate ideas constitute its greatest part.
So the more we understand, the more we act rather than react.
Exactly. By forming clear and distinct ideas, especially using reason and intuition, the second and third kinds of knowledge, we move from being determined by external unknown forces to being self-determined from our own rational nature. We become masters of our inner life.
And you mentioned this understanding even makes death less harmful. How does that work?
Well, the part of the mind that understands adequately, the intellect, is what Spinoza considers eternal. The imaginative passive part, tied to the body's affections, perishes with the body. So the more you cultivate the intellectual part, the larger the eternal aspect of your mind becomes, and the less significant the body's eventual demise seems. It builds an inner strength, an equanimity based on grasping eternal necessities. #, freedom and necessity.
Okay, I'm trying to wrap my head around this fully. Virtue is acting from reason, freedom is understanding. But we're still in a deterministic universe where everything is necessary. It still feels like a paradox. How can we be genuinely free if we couldn't have done otherwise? Doesn't necessity just cancel out freedom?
It feels like a paradox because we usually equate freedom with contingency, the ability to choose A or B arbitrarily. Spinoza completely redefines freedom. His freedom isn't about arbitrary choice, the absence of necessity. It's about self-determination based on rational understanding, as opposed to being determined by external forces or passions.
So freedom is necessity, but the right kind of necessity, acting from the necessity of my own rational nature.
Exactly. You're free when your actions flow necessarily from your adequate understanding of yourself and the world, rather than flowing necessarily from external pressures or confused internal states you don't understand. As he puts it, a free person lives solely by the dictate of reason, desires good directly, and acts on the foundation of pursuing what is useful for himself, understood rationally. Freedom is rational self-determination within necessity.
So the free person isn't fighting necessity. They're understanding and aligning with it.
Precisely. And this understanding leads to that profound shift in focus he talks about. Wisdom is a meditation not on death, but on life.
Instead of fearing death or seeking escape.
The free person, guided by reason, embraces life, affirms existence, strives for greater perfection and understanding right here, right now. It's about active engagement with the necessary order of things, not passive resignation or fearful avoidance.
And this rational free person, they act in good faith. They don't deceive.
Right. Because reason, seeking concord and mutual benefit, understands that deceit undermines the very foundation of rational cooperation. If reason urged deceit, it would urge it universally. leading to chaos, which is contrary to reason's goal of stable well-being. It's a logical consequence, not just a moral rule.
And this freedom is actually greater in a well-ordered society, not in isolation.
Yes, he argues a person who is led by reason is freer in a commonwealth where he lives by the common decree than in solitude where he obeys only himself. Because rational individuals recognize their interdependence and the power that comes from rational cooperation under just laws. True freedom flourishes in rational community. #, the highest good and blessedness.
Okay, so we follow this path. Understand the world through reason and intuition, transform passions into active emotions, act virtuously from our own power. What's the ultimate destination? What's the highest good, the ultimate goal of this whole philosophical journey?
The summit for Spinoza is crystal clear. The highest good of the mind is cognition of God, and the highest virtue of the mind is to know God.
Knowing God, meaning understanding nature, the one substance, in its eternal necessity.
Exactly. Achieving that deep, adequate understanding of the ultimate reality and how everything flows from it, that is the highest intellectual achievement, the greatest possible augmentation of our being, our kanatos.
And this leads to happiness.
It is happiness, or what he calls blessedness. The highest happiness or blessedness of a human being consists in this alone. It's not an external reward you get for being virtuous or knowledgeable. It is the state itself. It is the very contentment of spirit which arises from an intuitive cognition of God.
Contentment arising from that third kind of knowledge, scientia intuitiva.
Yes. That deep, unshakable inner peace and joy that comes from directly grasping the necessary eternal order of the universe and your place within it, seeing the perfection of the whole, even amidst apparent chaos or suffering.
And this leads to something even more profound, the intellectual love of God.
Yes. This intuitive cognition of God inevitably gives rise to the intellectual love of God, amor intellectualis Dei.
What kind of love is this? It's not an emotion like joy or sadness.
No, it's not a passion. It's an active, eternal love that springs directly from our highest understanding. And here Spinoza makes a truly breathtaking claim. This love that we feel for God is the very love of God with which God loves himself, not insofar as he is infinite, but insofar as he can be explained through the essence of the human mind considered from the vantage of eternity.
Wait, our love for God is part of God's love for God's self.
In a way, yes, our highest understanding and the love arising from it is a finite participation in God's infinite self-understanding and self-love, remembering God as nature. When we reach this state, our intellect, in its eternal aspect, merges with the divine intellect. We see things, in a sense, from God's perspective.
That's staggering.
It is, and this love, he adds, is common to all human beings who achieve this understanding. It cannot be tainted by the emotion of envy nor by the emotion of jealousy, because it's based on understanding, which is universal and shareable, not on finite objects or exclusive relationships. Unlike ordinary love or desire, the more people we imagine enjoying this intellectual love, the more it is fostered in us. It's an expansive, non-competitive, utterly stable joy, an everlasting contentment. # the wise versus the ignorant.
So ultimately, the ethics presents this really stark contrast, doesn't it? Between two ways of living, two kinds of people almost. The person ruled by passions versus the person guided by reason. The ignorant versus the wise.
It really does paint a vivid picture of these two extremes. On one hand, the ignorant person is agitated in many ways by external causes and never has true contentment of spirit.
Constantly reacting, never at peace.
Right. He lives ignorant of himself and of God and of things. And because his mind is primarily composed of imagination and passions tied to the body, Spinoza chillingly says, as soon as he ceases to be acted on, at the same time he also ceases to be. His existence is fragmented, reactive, and ultimately transient, lacking that stable eternal core.
And the wise person.
Conversely, a wise person, insofar as he is considered as such, is scarcely moved in spirit, not emotionless, but not agitated by passions. Why? Because they are conscious of himself and of God and of things by some eternal necessity. They understand the necessary order.
So they have inner peace.
They never cease to be, but always has possession of true contentment of spirit. Because the eternal part of their mind, the intellect, the part that understands and acts from adequate ideas, endures. They have cultivated this core of understanding that isn't subject to the whims of fortune or the storms of passion. They are truly self-possessed, living with a kind of eternal perspective in the present.
It's a powerful vision, not about finding easy answers, but about the diligent, maybe lifelong pursuit of knowledge and understanding as the path to true human flourishing and peace. #, influence and legacy. So does his ethics then. It was clearly a work way ahead of its time. We talked about the controversy, the excommunication. Yet despite that, it's had this profound, lasting influence, hasn't it?
Oh, immense. Even though it was condemned, banned the Catholic Church, put it on the index of forbidden books for centuries, its ideas just seeped into the intellectual landscape. It was like a philosophical time bomb.
How did its influence play out?
Well, his radical ideas, God is nature, substance monism, determinism, the naturalistic view of emotions, the power of reason laid crucial groundwork for major currents in Enlightenment thought, even if thinkers didn't always acknowledge him directly or agreed with everything.
That people wrestled with his ideas, even if they rejected them.
Exactly. His systematic, rational method, combined with his shocking conclusions, forced philosophers for centuries to engage with his arguments. You see echoes in discussions about determinism versus free will, the mind-body problem, the possibility of a purely rational ethics, the critique of traditional religion. It's everywhere.
And his insistence on understanding nature, including us, through natural laws rather than divine purpose.
That was truly groundbreaking. It was a decisive push towards a more scientific, naturalistic worldview, moving philosophy away from theology and toward understanding the world and ourselves on our own terms through reason. He fundamentally changed the questions philosophy was asking.
So we've journeyed through Spinoza's incredibly intricate, sometimes demanding, but ultimately coherent ethics. We've explored this unified vision of God, nature, humanity. From that rigorous geometrical method all the way to the pursuit of the intellectual love of God. Spinoza lays out this path to understanding and freedom that is still, centuries later, just profoundly thought-provoking.
Absolutely. And if you try to connect it all, maybe the core message is that how we perceive the world fundamentally shapes our experience of it. Being truly free for Spinoza isn't about somehow escaping necessity or having arbitrary choice. It's about understanding necessity, understanding ourselves and our place within the whole, and finding in that very understanding a deep, stable, unshakable contentment.
Freedom through understanding necessity, not freedom from it.
Precisely.
So what does this all mean for you, listening now? Perhaps the biggest takeaway is something Spinoza says right at the very end of the Ethics. All noble things are as difficult as they are rare.
That's certainly true of his philosophy.
Yeah. The path to wisdom and blessedness, as he maps it out, isn't easy. It's demanding. It requires real intellectual effort, persistent self-examination, maybe a willingness to fundamentally rethink some deeply held beliefs about God, freedom, and yourself.
Which leads us to maybe a final question for you to ponder. How might truly trying to embrace a deterministic worldview, seeing all events, including your own thoughts and choices, as necessary outcomes of prior causes, how might that actually change your approach to life? Would it lead to resignation? Or could it perhaps foster a deeper understanding, maybe more compassion for yourself and others, a greater sense of interconnectedness, knowing we're all part of the same necessary unfolding?
Something to definitely think about. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Spinoza's ethics. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep striving for that deeper understanding.